Tansy Aspinall's heart raced with excitement and a tinge of anxiety as the small boat bobbed through the serene waters leading to the gorilla sanctuary. Beside her, her father, Damien, shared a look of anticipation mixed with concern. They were moments away from a reunion years in the making, a reunion many had cautioned against. "Do you think he'll remember us after all this time?" Tansy asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to disturb the tranquility around them. Damien placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his eyes reflecting the depth of their shared history with the animals they were about to meet. "If there's one thing I know about Jolter, it's that he doesn't easily forget," he replied, his tone carrying a mixture of hope and realism. As the sanctuary came into view, a lush expanse teeming with the sounds of wildlife, Tansy's memories flooded back. She recalled the countless days spent playing alongside Jolter and his companions, the bonds formed under the watchful eyes of her father. Those memories seemed both like yesterday and a lifetime ago. Now, as the boat drew nearer, the reality of their mission set in. They were here to see if the wild had claimed back the gorillas, or if the emotional ties had withstood the test of time and nature. Tansy scanned the tree line, her heart skipping a beat every time a shadow moved. Damien readied the camera, knowing that moments like these were fleeting. "Ready to face the past?" he asked, squeezing her hand as the boat gently coasted to a stop at the riverbank. Tansy nodded, her eyes locked on the dense foliage where their future interactions would unfold, governed by the uncertain temperaments of creatures transformed by the wild. The step off the boat was a step back into a world that had once been their entire life. As they made their way towards the heart of the sanctuary, the crunch of leaves underfoot seemed to echo with the weight of their expectations. Would the gorillas remember, or had the wild erased the imprints of their shared past? As Tansy and Damien advanced cautiously through the dense foliage, the air thickened with the moist breath of the forest. It was a world alive with the rustle of leaves and distant calls, a world that had once been Tansy's playground. Ahead, a rustling sound stopped them in their tracks. Heart-pounding, Tansy peered through a gap in the bushes, and there, framed by the lush greenery, was Jolter. His massive form was both familiar and daunting, his dark eyes scanning the surroundings with an almost palpable intensity. For a moment, Tansy's resolve faltered. The warnings echoed in her mind. Gorillas that had returned to the wild could be unpredictable, potentially dangerous. Yet, as she watched Jolter move with a graceful power that spoke of his command over this piece of the forest, her fear was replaced by an overwhelming sense of connection. Ignoring her father's whispered caution, Tansy stepped forward, drawn by an invisible thread that connected her past with the present. "Tansy, wait!" Damien's voice was tense, laden with the weight of his protective instincts. But Tansy was already moving closer, her steps slow and measured, her body language open and non-threatening. She remembered the teachings from her childhood, the ways to communicate peace and respect to these magnificent creatures. Jolter stopped, his head tilting slightly as he regarded the approaching figure. His gaze was intense, searching, as if trying to connect the human before him with a memory that lay buried beneath years of survival and instinct. Tansy held her breath, her every sense heightened, aware that the next moments would define their relationship anew. Suddenly, Jolter's demeanor shifted. The stiffness in his posture eased as if recognition dawned upon him. He took a few steps forward, his movements deliberate. Tansy's heart raced, not with fear, but with a burgeoning hope. "It's me, Jolter. It's Tansy," she called softly, using the tone she had often used to soothe him as a youngster. The space between them closed, each of Jolter's steps resonating like a drumbeat in Tansy's chest. Then, with a gentleness that belied his formidable size, Jolter reached out. His large hand brushed against Tansy's arm, his touch tentative at first, then firming as if affirming her identity through the connection. Damien watched, ready to intervene at the slightest sign of aggression, but the reunion unfolded like a scene from a long-forgotten dream. Jolter's fingers curled slightly around Tansy's arm, not to harm, but to hold. A soft grunting sound escaped him, a sound that Tansy remembered well. It was the sound of greeting, of recognition. Relief and joy mingled in Tansy's eyes as she reached up to gently touch Jolter's face, tracing the lines that time had etched upon him. "I knew you'd remember," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Around them, the forest seemed to watch in silent witness to this tender reunion, a moment of connection that defied the years of separation and the wildness that had reclaimed Jolter. As Jolter's touch rekindled memories long dormant, Tansy's mind drifted back to her childhood days at the Howlett's Zoo. Back then, the boundaries between the human and animal worlds seemed negligible, blurred by daily interaction and mutual curiosity. She had been a constant figure in the gorilla enclosure, her presence as natural to the inhabitants as the trees that shaded their home. Tansy remembered the day Jolter arrived at the zoo, a tiny, trembling bundle that was immediately dependent on the humans around him for comfort and survival. She had been just a child herself, but her responsibilities had seemed immense as she took part in bottle feeding him, soothing him through the nights with gentle, humming lullabies that calmed his fretful murmurs. Her connection with Jolter was not just nurtured through care, but also through play. Hours spent mimicking each other's expressions, learning each other's moods and ways. "Remember how you used to steal my hat?" Tansy murmured, a smile breaking through as she gazed up at Jolter. Even now, she could see the mischievous glint that used to light up his eyes during their games. Jolter's response was a low, rumbling chuckle, an acknowledgement of shared secrets and shared pasts. Their bond had been strengthened by each shared experience. Tansy recalled the awe and slight nervousness of watching Jolter grow, his physical form burgeoning into the powerful male he now was, yet still exhibiting the gentle nature she had nurtured. Each milestone of his growth had been a bittersweet reminder that he would one day need to leave the safety of the zoo, leave her side, and reclaim his place in the wild. These memories were precious, not just for the joy they represented, but for the lessons they contained. Tansy had learned about trust, about the deep, abiding affection that could exist between species. She had learned too about letting go, about the necessity of returning Jolter to a life where he could be fully what nature intended him to be. Back in the present, as she stood with Jolter's hand still resting lightly on her arm, Tansy felt the weight of those lessons anew. Here, amidst the sounds and sights of the wild sanctuary, she understood that their past encounters had shaped not just her relationship with Jolter, but her entire approach to life and conservation. It was a bond forged in the simplicity of childhood and tempered by the complexities of growth and return. As Tansy stood anchored by Jolter's gentle grip, a flurry of activity around them drew her attention back to the present. Other gorillas, curious about the encounter, began to edge closer, their movements cautious but intrigued. Jolter seemed aware of their presence, yet his focus remained intensely on Tansy, his gaze piercing and contemplative. Without warning, Jolter released Tansy's arm and stepped back, his massive form casting a shadow over the leaf-strewn ground. His eyes never left hers, and for a heart-stopping moment, Tansy feared she had lost the connection they had just rekindled. But then, with a deliberate slowness, Jolter raised his arms, not in aggression, but in a display reminiscent of their playtimes. It was an invitation, a silent call back to the games they had once shared. Tansy hesitated, her father's cautionary words echoing in her mind. Yet, the familiarity of Jolter's gesture, a playful stance they had enacted countless times, overrode her trepidation. She mimicked his movement, raising her arms in response. The tension that had tightened the air between them shifted, morphing into a playful challenge that broke the heavy cloak of uncertainty. Jolter's reaction was immediate. His lips curled into a semblance of a grin, and he took a lumbering step forward, his demeanor clearly gentle. The surrounding gorillas watched, their own bodies relaxed, as if taking their cues from Jolter's behavior. "Is this really happening?" Damien whispered from behind her, his voice a mix of astonishment and relief. "It is," Tansy replied softly, her eyes still locked with Jolta's. "He remembers. He really remembers." Encouraged by her acknowledgement, Jolta closed the distance once again. This time, he reached out and gently tapped Tansy's forehead with his finger, a gesture so intimately familiar that it drew a laugh from Tansy, bright and clear, filled with the joy of undisputed recognition. They continued this gentle dance of familiar gestures, each movement a reaffirmation of their shared past. It was a profound testament to the bonds that could form across species, a connection not dimmed by time or the wild forces that had shaped Jolta's new life. In those moments, the fears that had clouded Tansy's return melted away, replaced by the profound realization that true affection, once rooted, remains resilient, thriving on memories and transcending the barriers of time and change. As the initial shock of recognition between Tansy and Jolta settled, the other gorillas began to cautiously approach, their eyes flickering with a mixture of curiosity and caution. One, a younger female with a playful demeanor, edged closer to Tansy, her movements tentative yet curious. Tansy recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same inquisitive gaze that Jolta had often given her as a young gorilla. Damien watched, camera in hand, capturing the unfolding moments of interspecies communication. He marveled at how the other gorillas seemed to take their cues from Jolta, his acceptance of Tansy signaling to them that she was not a threat, but part of their extended community. "Look at them, Dad," Tansy whispered, her voice a blend of awe and excitement. "They're trying to figure me out, just like Jolta did." The younger female gorilla, emboldened by Jolta's calm, ventured closer and extended a hand towards Tansy, mimicking Jolta's earlier gestures. With a gentle touch, she brushed Tansy's hand, her fingers lingering with a soft, exploratory pressure. Tansy responded with a slow, welcoming stroke of the gorilla's hand, a universal sign of peace and friendship. "It's like they remember you through him," Damien noted, his voice low but filled with wonder. Tansy nodded, her heart swelling with the realization that her bond with Jolta was indeed influencing the group's reception of her. "It's more than memory, Dad. It's like a legacy of trust that we built with Jolta, and now it's extending to them." The interaction grew as more gorillas joined the quiet gathering. They circled around Tansy and Damien, each taking turns to inspect these familiar yet foreign visitors. There was no aggression, only an overwhelming sense of curiosity and an unspoken acceptance that filled the clearing with a profound sense of connection. Jolta, observing the interactions, made a low, rumbling sound that seemed to encourage his troops' engagement. This sound, a comforting murmur in the gorilla world, resonated through the group, reinforcing the atmosphere of trust and acceptance. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows over the sanctuary, the gorillas slowly started to retreat back into the forest, their visits marked by frequent backward glances towards Tansy and Damien. In these lingering looks, there was a recognition, an understanding that transcended the barriers of wild and tamed. "They know us now," Tansy said, a note of contentment in her voice. "Or at least, they know we mean no harm." Damien put his arm around Tansy, proud and reflective. "You've done more than just revisit an old friend today," he said. "You've bridged a gap that few can claim to have crossed." As they prepared to leave, Tansy took one last look at Jolta and the gorillas disappearing into the foliage, her heart full of peace, knowing that the bond formed in her childhood had endured, adapted, and flourished in the wilds of their natural home. As the afternoon waned into evening, the time for Tansy and Damien to depart drew near. The air was thick with the scent of the damp earth, a constant reminder of the day's profound encounters. Tansy lingered by the edge of the clearing, her gaze fixed on Jolta and his troop as they began to retreat deeper into the sanctuary. Each step they took seemed laden with the gravity of goodbye. Jolta paused, turning to look back at Tansy with what seemed an understanding of their impending separation. His gaze held a depth of emotion, a silent communication of the bond they had reaffirmed. With a heavy heart, Tansy stepped forward, her approach slow and deliberate, mirroring the respect and sadness of the moment. "I'll never forget today, Jolter," Tansy spoke softly, her voice carrying through the quiet forest. "You've shown me that no matter how much time passes, some connections never fade." Her words floated in the air, a testament to the day's revelations and reconciliations. Jolter responded by moving closer, his large form looming gently over her. He extended his hand, touching her cheek in a gesture so tender it was as if he were trying to memorize her face. Tansy reached up, her hand clasping his, savoring the rough warmth of his skin. It was a farewell, filled not with words, but with touch, the most primal and profound form of communication they shared. Damien, observing quietly from a distance, captured the moment, knowing it was more than just a parting. It was a recognition of shared histories and futures that would diverge once more. He watched as Tansy reluctantly withdrew her hand, stepping back to join him. "Do you think this is the last time?" Damien asked as they began their walk back to the boat. "I don't know, Dad," Tansy replied, her eyes moist with emotion. "But whether it is or not, I'm grateful for today. Grateful that we could say goodbye this way." As they reached the boat, Tansy took one last glance over her shoulder. Jolter was still watching, his figure a strong silhouette against the fading light. His presence was a silent promise of the wild's continuance, a life going on in a realm apart from hers, yet forever linked by their past. With the engine starting, the boat pulled away from the bank, the sound of the water churning a soft echo of the day's emotions. Tansy felt a mix of sorrow and fulfillment. The sanctuary, with all its wild inhabitants, receded into the background, a poignant reminder of what had been regained and what must be left behind. As the shoreline disappeared, Tansy held onto the feeling of Jolter's touch, the weight of his gaze, carrying it with her as the boat carried them back to a world where such connections were rare and all the more cherished. As the boat sped away from the sanctuary, the immediate rush of emotions began to settle, and Tansy's thoughts turned introspective. The silhouettes of the gorillas, now just shadows intertwined with the trees, lingered in her mind as a symbol of her past merging into her present, a reminder of the enduring bonds formed across the boundaries of human and animal realms. Reflecting on the day's events, Tansy realized that this journey was not just about revisiting old friends. It was about reaffirming her commitment to conservation and understanding the profound impact of her foundation's work. The successful reintroduction of Jolter and his troop into the wild was a testament to the Foundation's efforts, and seeing them thrive had reinvigorated her passion for her work. "The world they live in now, it's the one we fought to give them," Tansy mused aloud, her voice carrying over the hum of the boat's engine. Damien nodded, his eyes reflecting pride and a shared resolve. "And it's a world that needs protecting, now more than ever." "Yes," Tansy agreed, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "What we've done for Jolter and the others, it's just the beginning. There's so much more to do, and I'm more ready than ever to take on that challenge." The conversation dwindled as they both took in the vast expanse of water around them, each lost in their thoughts. Tansy thought about the future of the Foundation, considering new strategies and initiatives that could expand their impact. She knew that the memories of this day would fuel her endeavors, serving as a constant reminder of why their work was so crucial. As the boat approached the dock, the reality of their everyday lives awaited, but Tansy felt changed. The encounter had deepened her resolve and broadened her perspective on how intertwined human actions were with the fates of these magnificent creatures. "I'm ready to push harder for their sake," Tansy resolved quietly to herself. "Their survival and well-being are worth every effort, every sacrifice." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow that seemed to encapsulate the promise of future endeavors. Tansy's journey had come full circle, and she was ready to use the insights gained to advocate and act even more fervently for wildlife conservation. The legacy of her bond with Jolter, strengthened by their reunion, would now inspire her continued commitment to a cause that had defined her family's life and her own.